So to talk about progress in the field of meditation, first off we have to know what meditation is, and then we have to know how to measure the outcome of doing it and how to measure movement toward those outcomes, as if we had standardized tests that could tell us these things. But there are great difficulties in even begin to talk about meditation, to know what meditation is. I'll go over just a few of them, okay? Can I have the next slide, please, Cindy? The first problem is limitations in our logic. Keep rotating. There we go, right? Sometimes you think you've got a problem and it keeps twisting on you, and no matter how much you try, right? Okay? Here's the totality of reality. I like that phrase. It's very euphonic up top. Everything that actually is. But we're human beings. We have a smaller segment of that reality. Because of the way we're constructed, we normally can only tune into a certain part of that total reality. We can tune in through our senses, through instruments that augment our senses, and through inferences we make. So we get information about that totality of reality and we act back on it within our human reality. Within that subset of total reality, human reality, there's an even smaller subset of things that are subject to logical definition. Logical definition is a great tool when it's appropriate, and especially when you know it's no longer appropriate. So a lot of our talking has to be down here, but it's a small subset of this much wider spectrum, and I really wanted to draw this arrow to infinity in both directions, but the limitations of the slide medium are a problem. So we have limits by being human, limits on our reasoning, our logic, our experience. But here we are human, and we're trying to figure things out, so we'll do the best we can within that. I also think it's not too healthy to think about ultimate limitations or possible ultimate limitations too much, because it discourages you from doing things. One of my favorite sayings is from Henry Ford, who said, "Those who think they can and those who think they can't are both right." On the other hand, the Buddha did come up with a list of about 5 things he advised unenlightened people not to think about, because they would just drive you crazy if you thought about them without being enlightened. I generally forget what's on the list, so that way I don't have a problem thinking about them. So we're within this human realm. That puts some limits on us. Okay, next slide, please. There are further limits because we're in our ordinary state of consciousness now. And our ordinary state of consciousness is very good for certain kinds of things, very limited for other kinds of things, and probably distorts other kinds of things badly. Years ago, I wrote an article proposing that we should investigate various altered states of consciousness and try to create state-specific sciences for each one of those things. So I understand the limits. Now, this is still a proposal, not a reality. There aren't any places where you could major in state-specific sciences, although I hope that will change someday. To bring this back to meditation, when I'm meditating, sometimes more successfully than others, there are things I can kind of comprehend or think about within that particular state or condition that I can't really remember what it's about now, or I can only give very inadequate ideas about it. There's state-specific kinds of knowledge. But again, we're here. We're now, I presume most people are in a reasonable enough approximation of a normal state of consciousness that you're allowed to walk around loose, so we'll see what we can figure out within the limits of this particular state of consciousness. Now, the third set of difficulties in talking about this comes with the term meditation, and that is the inconsistent and contradictory uses of the term that sometimes drive me mad. Is meditation serious thinking, as in this lecture's title? First time I ever tried to figure out what meditation was, I looked it up in a psychological dictionary. I mean, I went to authority for a psychologist, and it said meditation was serious thinking. I kind of liked that in a way. It made me a heavy-duty meditator, but on the other hand, I suspected something was being left out. But even in the meditative tradition, sometimes they mean systematic thinking when they say meditation. Is meditation guided imagery? Is it concentrated visualizations where you do some mandala up in the air and start it rotating and don't let it flicker or something like that? Is it simple concentration, like trying to follow the movement of your belly and breathing without elaborating on it in any way? Is meditation a technique for coping with stress? Obviously, it's all these things so far, given the way people use it. Is meditation a matter of insights? Is it achieving altered states of consciousness? I won't even go into altered states of consciousness here. You know, I just did a whole class last quarter on altered states of consciousness, and I think the students came away realizing they knew a lot more and probably still didn't know what an altered state of consciousness was. Is meditation reaching enlightenment, whatever enlightenment is? Is meditation purifying ordinary consciousness? Is meditation non-meditation, as they say in the Dzogchen tradition? You know, where they have all these wonderful learned debates of when do I ever meditate? If you simply look around at the way people use the word meditation, it is used in so many different ways, many of which are contradictory to one another, that simply hearing someone say, I meditate, tells you almost nothing about what they do. Now, a lot of times we overlook that because we want to make friends, and I'm a meditator, you're a meditator, let's be friends, let's not look at the differences. But if we want to make any kind of progress in meditation, we've got to get a much more consistent terminology. I gave a lecture at the American Psychological Association last August comparing meditation and hypnosis. It was the result of something I'd wanted to do for years, because meditation in the old psychological and psychiatric literature had always been dismissed as some form of self-hypnosis, as if we understood hypnosis. And I wanted to demolish that myth. But one of the main things I had to conclude was that anything I could say in that lecture, and this applies to this lecture too, about, quote, meditation, could be directly contradicted by people's personal experience or by authoritative uses of that particular term. Now, this is a new problem for us in a way. In the old days, when most people never traveled more than 10 or 20 miles from the village they grew up in, they were lucky if they had heard of any kind of meditative tradition, and if they had, they heard of one tradition that talked about meditation probably in one way. The fact that we live in such a rich world introduces this confusion to us. But it's an important confusion. And I want to contrast that in areas where there have been progress. In chemistry, for instance, oxygen always refers to the same element. It doesn't mean nitrogen sometimes and carbon dioxide. It always refers to the same thing. The terminology is consistent. Does that have something to do with progress? Could I have the next slide, please? Another important limitation is that I'm an unenlightened person talking to you about a technique that's supposed to produce enlightenment. So it could be that everything I think about it is totally off. But nevertheless, here we are, and you can take that slide off for a while, Cindy Lou, because we don't have to emphasize my unenlightened aspect. And then one-fifth problem in talking about meditation, sometimes I begin to suspect that the people who teach meditation are consciously or semi-consciously being obtuse. Because, you know, after all, being a meditation teacher is a fairly good way to make a living in most parts of the world. It's a lot easier than farming. And you have to have your students dependent on you for a long period of time. The longer the better, because that way they keep serving you and paying you and whatnot. So there's a sort of built-in motivation in the system to not get things too clear or too efficient. I hope that's not true very often, but I think so. I can remember once I was starting to take Tai Chi from a teacher who was very good, okay, and I know words are not really the thing, but he was very good in saying what to do next, and I was interested in just getting the basic movements down. But he went through them too fast until by the third session, you know, I was still on step 10 of the first session, and there were 17 steps beyond that, and I couldn't remember them, and I didn't really want to practice mistakes. And I asked him, could I just bring a tape recorder in next time so I just get the sequence recorded? He wouldn't let me do it. Now, he acted like he was paranoid that I'd steal his secrets in a way, but I couldn't help but suspect, you know, this keeps the student dependent on the teacher for a long time and is good for the teacher's income. Hope there's not too much of that, but, you know, we're kind of sociologically sophisticated nowadays, and those things probably happen. So given these limitations, I still have something to say that I think will be worthwhile. Even though I don't have the answers, I want to help us work towards some of them so that we can get a wider cross-cultural and scientific understanding that would make meditation more effective.